So welcome to this week's storage provider meetup. Of course, we're going to begin with some storage provider oriented topics, then we're going to move a little more general toward the end. But we'll make sure that you know the latest with what we're working on, with how it affects you and what you need to know. So first thing I'll begin with is the full license update that went out earlier this week. This is a pretty major update, so if you're running full license, be sure that you see that message in the announcements channel. It contains all sorts of bug fixes, but also a couple of kind of minor functionality tweaks and improvements. So that's the case right now for the Linux full license software. It's also the case, or this upgrade is in place for fresh Windows full license installs as well. But for those who are hoping to migrate their existing installs on Windows, we just ask that you hold on another week or two as we get that release finished. But for two of those three mentioned groups, that's out today, and you can visit our announcements channel for the full scoop and exactly how to do that upgrade process. It's just the most recent message in the announcements channel, but you'll definitely want to do that because the devs have been very hard at work and very busy. Kind of a side note, we have started hosting some more of our meetings in conference room 1, which I'm not sure if you guys have noticed, but we do have several conference rooms in our Discord. And of course, as I'm sure a lot of you have probably noticed, we do actually work in our own Discord. We don't have a separate like Microsoft Teams chat going on or anything. We do work out of our own server, but we do have a couple voice channels that you guys don't always get to see. But we know that you guys probably like seeing that we are actually going into work every day. And I don't know, I just thought maybe it'd be more interesting for you guys if you actually kind of got some visibility into, what do you know? A bunch of people are in conference room 1 and actually doing some work. So that's a thing as well. Devs have been working hard, but we've got that full license upgrade out now. And yeah, you can read up on that in the announcements channel. So as well for the basic licenses, which is still obviously a lot of people, we've been talking about Supervisor Lite for a little bit at this point. So this is just kind of a refresher. Supervisor Lite is bringing the some of the supervisor functionality, but to the basic license. So this is namely the auto reannounce and the auto pricing. So these are two things that historically have been some kind of barriers or brought some friction to storage providing. If you're on an IP that changes pretty frequently, or even just once in a while, it could be a real pain to have to keep reannouncing your host or your provider manually. So auto reannounce is really handy, and the auto pricing as well. As everybody knows, it's no secret, coin price is volatile, both in the short term and the long term. And it's just no good if you're constantly having to kind of go in and make sure that your price is the highest that it can be, but without overcharging, because then that has problems. So this cleans up all sorts of kind of nothing that was a huge headache, but just kind of little consistent jabs that existed with storage providing. So Supervisor Lite is, I believe, releasing either today or tomorrow, but in the next 24 hours for certain. I think we're just waiting on the final kind of thumbs up from everybody, but most of the team has given the thumbs up at this point, and it's looking like that'll come out very shortly. So keep an eye out for that as well. Of course, that will be in the announcements channel when that's available. Another thing to touch on, obviously, for those who have Xminer, both hardware and software, we've used rebates to help ensure that some quick return is received pretty quickly and that isn't related to the exact performance of either the network or the coin price or anything, that there is some kind of return that's locked in and on a schedule. So the rebates, I think, have been pretty successful in terms of achieving our goals, and people seem pretty happy with them. But they are coming, well, all good things must come to an end. And as of October 31st, any sales made after that day will not receive quite the full amount of rebate that we've offered historically. So we've announced at this point that the Xminer hardware, both models offered, will be moving to only a 25% rebate after October 31st. And some of the other products in our shop, such as the basic licenses, which were fully rebated after October 31st. There may still be some promos done, or that there may still be some rebate, but it will not be nearly as generous as it is today. So if you're on the fence or you're considering it, there is a little bit of a time frame that you need to work within. It's October 20th today, so you've got a week and a half to make your mind up. But there is somewhat of a ticking clock on that. It isn't isn't ticking too loudly at the moment, but just do keep that in mind and know that any purchases after October 31st will not receive the full bout of rebates that everybody up to now has enjoyed. So apart from that, I think I kind of alluded to it a few moments ago that the rebate program in general is pretty important and I think has been enjoyed by a lot of our community. So as we alluded to in, I think, last week's call, I think it was, we have put out a new Twitter account for XNS Cloud. Those tweets are now showing up as well in the social media info or the social media channel in our project info tab in our Discord. So I encourage you to follow it on Twitter. But if you're not a Twitter user, you can also still see the tweets in the Discord just by visiting that aforementioned channel. But yeah, do check out our XNS Cloud Twitter account. So yeah, if you visit it, what you'll see thus far is that there have been a couple articles tweeted out. So we've been open about the fact that on our exapro.net website, I've been personally, but with the help of many others as well, working on putting out lots of articles and content and covering all sorts of different assets and aspects of what our project includes. Because really compared to a lot of other projects, especially, there's a lot going on here. I mean, it covers everything from consumer hardware to like different software, some of which is open source, some of it is like enterprise. It covers aspects of like blockchain and network and IT systems. So we have fingers in a lot of pies, I guess. We have a lot going on with our project, and there's frankly a lot of interesting things to be able to dive into. So on the exapro.net website, there's a resources tab that is having, it already has a number of resources. By resources, we mostly mean kind of articles, but those articles will cover a bunch of different aspects, and some will be kind of guides, tutorials, some will be a bit more technical. I think we've kind of covered this already, so I'm not going to go too far into it, but if you visit it today, there might be a couple more articles or a couple more pages than were there the last time you visited. And on our XNS Cloud Twitter, we do have a plan to kind of every week we'll cover 2 articles until we either run out of articles or run out of weeks, but that's not how time works. So I think you can expect on that Twitter account to be kept up to date with the different articles that we're putting out, and we'll kind of highlight 2 a week. So that gives us about a month of runway given the current articles. But we'll talk about today some of the articles that were highlighted. So one of those was highlighted yesterday. That is the Xminer Rebate Program. So yeah, I kind of discussed this earlier in terms of what it helps achieve and everything. So the Xminer Rebate Program is something that has been in place since the very start of when we introduced the Xminer hardware. And we like it so much that we've also introduced it to our other software releases. And what this helps do, I don't think you could kind of boil it down to just achieving one thing. So I guess I discussed earlier that it helps ensure that there's some kind of locked-in return that isn't dependent on other factors that may be either affected by volatility or other unforeseen events. So there is some return that is kind of for sure in place, which is something that is always a bit of an unknown when you're, I suppose, in the crypto hardware or software purchasing market. You never really know when you're a consumer exactly what performance a unit is going to achieve. I'm old enough to remember, before everybody reminds me how young I am, but I'm old enough to remember back when Bitmain would introduce a new ASIC miner and everybody would be talking about how much it earns in the first week. But then what they don't tell you is that they're dropping like 20,000 of those miners. And once they all come online, then the returns are going way down because everybody's trying to get a slice of the same pie. So I understand, we understand the angle of how consumers kind of approach some of these purchases in our space. Obviously, if you know anything about the Xminer, that's not at all the same model that we work on. Well, the Xminer's returns are not coming out of, they're not all coming out of the same pie. They're not, there isn't like a block reward that's kind of set and then everybody is working to get a piece of it. Our network is kind of living and breathing, and it grows as we bring on more data and customers, and there's, it's so much deeper. You can get into like, okay, well, Is there demand for high performance nodes or kind of more large archival type stuff? You can really get into the weeds, but I think our network is really interesting, and you couldn't kind of boil down simply how the reward structure works, but it's certainly not the case of kind of historically how some ASIC mining has worked. So, anywho, with all that being said, so our rebate program we introduced obviously to help make it a bit more consumer friendly and kind of lock in some return. But another thing that it helps achieve as well is that well, it's no secret that you need to provide some coins in order to keep storage providing. So it means that once you plug in your hardware, you're not having to then hop over to an exchange and buy some coins and then be able to provide them to your miner so it can actually work. It means that it's able to essentially work out of the box. I mean, you're certainly welcome to bring on some of the coins if you'd like, but it should work pretty much just fine for at least the first while anyway. They've gone over a year at this point, and I'm not sure that there's anybody that's reached the point where they need to add coins on top of the rebate that they have, but I have seen a couple of cases of people who maybe sold off all their rebate coins and have failed a contract as a result because they don't have enough coins to renew. That is something that we see every once in a while. So, anywho, that's a kind of long way of just saying that the rebate program also helps achieve the X miner to function as intended, kind of right from the beginning. Right after plugging in, you're able to begin getting contracts and receive data right from kind of day one. But then there is also the schedule as well. So you do get the immediate rebate, of course, but then there is kind of the 6 month, the 9 months, and the 12-month rebate that give you some goals along the way. So that also kind of speaks to a purpose that the rebates serve. It's not just to give you some coins so you can get started. It's not just so you feel more confident in being able to buy. The rebates also kind of serve a purpose on our end, and that is that we want the best network that we can make, and we like giving you guys kind of goals. So that's certainly why, if you've ever visited Grafana, why there's a big kind of uptime thing in kind of the top left in a different color. It's kind of the first thing you see, is because we like. I wouldn't say that we. Trying to think of how to phrase this, because it's not really a game. I wouldn't say we're giving you guys like a goal to kind of work towards, because that makes it sound a little childish. But at the end of the day, these are real miners that are, well, these are real value creating devices, or they produce value for the real world. And the longer you're online, the more uptime you have, and all sorts of other aspects that can be measured in terms of like your speeds, your availability, and pretty much anything that can be measured can be determined of whether you are, performing as well as you could be, or compared to like other storage providers. How do you do? The rebate program certainly gives some incentive to stay online, because right now, and I think long term, ultimately the most important single aspect that you are in control of anyway for storage providing is your uptime and availability. I mean, at the end of the day, speed is also really good. There's a couple other things like proximity, so latency. There's a whole more that you could kind of dive into, but at the end of the day, if the data isn't even available in the first place, then the network is kind of in trouble and not able to function as efficiently as it can. We've talked before about how churn is kind of damaging to the network. So at the end of the day, staying online is something that is hopefully within your control. I mean, obviously there are some unforeseen circumstances, and that's just kind of life, but it is something that hopefully is within your control and is very important to the responsibility that you're taking on as a storage provider. So the rebates also help kind of align our incentives between you, the storage provider, and us as the storage user, as that you guys get paid the most if you spend the most time online, and we are happy to pay you the most if you stay online, because that is also then creating more real world value that we're able to then spread and kind of sell for money and grow the network, and just everybody's happy. So the rebates do a lot to kind of help make sure that people aren't just kind of setting up their miner, and then after a couple of months they decide, oh, it's I was going to say it's too ugly, it's too noisy, but it's really neither of those things. So, but if you can find some other problem that you have with it, then Then if after a couple months you just decided you wanted it gone, then the rebates are kind of a mechanism that we can help make sure that you give it some additional consideration and that you're not just kind of absent-mindedly doing something that actually has some effects in the real world and maybe would affect file availability or our ability to kind of help sell storage for the network. So yeah, the rebates are a pretty important dynamic. So I think they will stay around in some capacity anyway. So we're not totally retiring the rebate program. We do like it, and I think it achieves all sorts of healthy network effects. But like I said earlier, at the end of the month, after October 31st, it will be kind of taking a bit of a step down in terms of the rebate percentage. So from roughly 40% on the Xminer hardware down to 25%, and on the Xminer software licenses for both full and basic and everything else that there might be, like the upgrades, those will be changing as well. So if you're on the fence, then think about it hard, because you do have 10 or 11 days, but at the end of the day, this how awesome the rebates have been was never going to be around forever. All good things do come to an end, so you're going to have to either make a decision of getting on the boat or not. So I encourage you to do that before October 31st in order to still have access to the rebate program that everyone up to now has enjoyed. So that's that's kind of the one of the major topics and the articles that we've tweeted out on the XNS Cloud. The other one that we tweeted out, and this is one that I'm kind of happy to talk about because it gets into some of the real nitty gritty of what makes our network awesome, especially compared to some of the others. So this is something that it took me a long time actually of being involved in the project to fully understand what it meant. If you've been around the project for a little while, you've probably heard of erasure codes, but I will tell you that almost who knows what an erasure code is? That is not, it's not something that you would encounter in everyday parlance. Conceptually, I think they're pretty straightforward actually how they work. So erasure codes, the problem that they're solving is essentially with digital data that's kind of stored either on a hard drive or a CD, like any kind of digital medium. Obviously, so if it's digital, that means it's stored in ones and zeros. You can either have the problem of some of the ones turned into zeros or some of the zeros turned into ones, so that kind of thing. There can be an actual problem with the data that's stored itself. And it would be a big shame if you had an enormous hard drive, like 18 terabytes or something, and then a couple bits flipped, and then suddenly all 18 terabytes are not really usable. So you have the problem of your storage format can be flaky, and then there's also just the problem of sometimes an entire hard drive might die, or an entire disk, like a CD-ROM or something, might not be good either. So this is so the problem that erasure codes tackle is essentially when there's either unavailability of the data, or if there's some kind of corruption or there's a problem with digitally stored data. So what erasure codes do is they kind of approach this problem by saying, hey, is there a way that before we put the data onto the disk or the CD-ROM or whatever, the reason I'm bringing up CD-ROMs actually is because Blu-ray players, or Blu-ray discs, use erasure codes pretty heavily. And this concept goes back to the 80s, or the 70s or 80s. So we've been doing it for a while, but it works well. So what the erasure code process does is it kind of conceptually says, hey, is there some math or some kind of operation that we could do to this data before it goes on the disk that would make it so if we see it later and something has happened to it, either it's a little bit corrupted or some of it's gone, we would still be able to interpolate or kind of interpret what should have been there instead. So the way that it does that is by having these kind of certain data chunks and parity chunks. The parity is essentially just some redundant data. This is, if you get into the technicals of exactly how it implements this and how it takes your original file, it splits it into the data chunks and the parity chunks, that's where it can get kind of technical. And then, okay, how big is each chunk, and what ratio do you have between the data pieces and the parity pieces. So that's kind of where it gets all technical, and um, that is where you start to earn your living if you dive into that, just in the sense that it can get kind of messy, but also powerful. So to really squeeze the most out of erasure codes, you do need to understand how that process works and be able to find the most optimum ratio for what you're trying to do. But conceptually, you don't really need to worry that much. Like if you're just interested in how they work, you don't need to know quite to that level of squeezing out all the efficiency out of it. You just need to know that there are some data pieces, there are some parity pieces, and if you're missing a couple data pieces or you're missing a couple parity pieces, you'll probably still be okay because there's just enough information that has been made redundant that you can still kind of interpolate the missing data. So yeah, a way that you could kind of think of it maybe is or you've seen like maybe if you're in like if you're an English native speaker or something and somebody says a sentence to you, but maybe you couldn't hear a couple words or a couple letters of what they said, just based on maybe what the context of what you're talking about, maybe the pace they said it. I think it's everybody kind of understands that you're able to sometimes interpret some missing information just based on cues around it. So yeah, so like if you're opening a conversation with someone and then they say like H something LLO, you can probably assume they're saying hello. But so that's kind of a conceptual example of being able to produce some missing data just based on the cues around it. So that's kind of similar to what erasure codes are trying to do. But obviously they have a much more formal and kind of rigorous process because it does need to be done by machines and it needs to be done as efficiently as possible. So anywho, that was a long way of saying that erasure codes are really powerful for any long-term digital storage. They're used pretty broadly in the industry. So the reason I haven't really been touting them thus far as some kind of advantage that is unique to us is because really a lot of people are using erasure codes for a lot of problems. So if you've heard of like hard drive, like RAID storage, like you've heard of like RAID 0, RAID 1, RAID 5, that kind of thing. Those are systems for using erasure codes as well. So it's pretty industry standard, especially when it comes to storage on hard drives. But what I was saying earlier about if you get into the nitty gritty of exactly how it's implemented, there's all sorts of efficiencies that you can extract basically for free. So this is something that that we took on and understood the importance of pretty early in our project. So the second article that was tweeted out this week is called Erasure Code Overview. I also encourage you to click on it, and there's a nice little diagram made by yours truly that I think helps explain what is happening as well. So the original renter-host protocol that we kind of adapted out of, or we evolved from, that had it, or that described a network so that all storage providers on the network were hosting either data pieces or parity pieces that were uploaded to them by renters. That is still something that we use. We think that is the best approach to having a performant network that is also redundant and ensures availability of data. There are some other storage networks out there that don't take this approach. So one that was being discussed in the server earlier was Filecoin. Filecoin is a network where there isn't the Filecoin protocol, an IPFS protocol. It doesn't actually describe a system for having erasure codes and distributing them out across several providers. That's just not a thing over there. It's not. I don't fully understand their reason for not doing that because it makes a lot of sense to me. But that's just not a thing that they chose to do. So not all storage networks do that, but I would say a lot of them do have this kind of method of the person uploading the data will select a variety of different storage providers and will upload out to them these data and parity pieces. And then when they need to recreate the file, they just contact those storage providers and get them back. And so it's pretty straightforward. It's efficient. It works well. It's really scalable, which is nice. And like you can tune it for all sorts of different things. So if you need to tune it for super high availability and speed and performance, you can do that. But if you need like super low cost and not necessarily the highest performance or availability, that can be a thing too. So it's really like scalable and can work for all sorts of different solutions for all sorts of different problems. So that's what we really enjoy about it. But back to the renter host protocol that we evolved out of. So the original implementation described that each storage provider would have a full copy of either data or parity pieces. So that would mean if you're uploading like a 1 terabyte file, you being the uploader would split it up into those data and parity pieces in what's called rows. You don't really, just conceptually, you probably don't need to worry that much about what a row is, but that just describes how it is performing the transformation from the original data file into these erasure coded pieces. But anyway, so each storage provider would have a complete copy of all the rows that are covered. So you may have something like 10 storage providers, and each one would have a full copy from each row. But I mean, that works. I couldn't really paint a downside of doing it that way. It's just that there is a better way of doing it because, well, I suppose one of the downsides is doing it that way is, so if you have 10 storage providers, which obviously isn't a lot, but I went with a low number just so we're not confusing anybody. So if you have 10 storage providers and you lose one, suddenly you've lost like 10% of your chunks, which is a big problem. Nobody's really happy in that situation because the storage provider probably feels bad that they're going offline with a large portion of your data. And you as the renter are not very happy either because while you do still have redundancy because you do still have access to 90% of your chunks, that's an awful lot of your availability that just disappeared because one person went offline. It also means that your speeds for either uploading or downloading are limited to the speeds that are made available from only 10 storage providers, which isn't an awful lot of storage providers. So if all those people are just kind of hosting from home and maybe they have like pretty asynchronous upload speeds, so like they only have 30 megabit upload, then that limits you kind of right off the bat to only, well, I guess 10 times 30, so 300 megabit upload, which is your download. So, well, you as the renter, it's your download if it's their upload. So that's not terribly fast anyway. So while that system and that method does kind of work, it doesn't work as well as it could. So one of the innovations that we brought, and this is what I think the diagram highlights pretty nicely, with this new distribution, we pick way more than 10 storage providers. You could do like 100 or even more if you wanted to. But just in this example, just to not go super crazy, let's call it like 25 or 30 or something. So instead of each storage provider being given a full copy of all the data, of all the rows, the kind of parity and data bits, those are, or the chunks, sorry, not bits. Those are just kind of sprinkled around to all sorts of different providers. So that means no one provider has a large proportion of the data. So that means if anybody goes offline, it doesn't affect your availability too much. And it also has the benefit of being a much more parallel network environment. So your uploads and downloads they'll have access to a much larger pipe than they would otherwise, because suddenly you have the combined bandwidth of 25 or 30 providers instead of just the 10 previous. So it's kind of a way to squeeze out some extra performance and availability with really no downside. It's just kind of there if you are savvy enough to take advantage to it, and we're the ones that kind of first identified that and put that into place. And as far as I know, I think we're still really the only storage network out there that is really aggressively distributing the erasure code pieces across tons and tons of different providers, because it has all those advantages of very robust availability. So you're like hardly affected at all, or like only a very minor amount by somebody going online or offline. And you have access to the largest kind of combined parallel network speeds as available. So once again, that's something that there's really no downside to doing it that way. The old way works too. Like there's nothing that bad about it. It does work, but it's just that it can be better. And on our network, it is better. So that's definitely responsible for the speeds that we're able to advertise. I don't know how much I want to talk today about the actual speeds. That might be a future storage provider meetup topic. We have been doing some testing over the last couple months. I mean, that's been no secret. We have done some speed tests, and the results are very good. And I'm very confident that we have the fastest distributed network available. And a large part of why we are able to enjoy those speeds and can make claims like that is through this parallelism that is made through erasure codes. So that was kind of technical. I applaud you if you stuck with me through all that and hopefully understood most of it. But in case you want a little bit of understanding kind of firmed up, or you want to be able to kind of come back to it and make sure that you understood it properly, definitely visit the article that was linked. It and all the other articles are on exapro.net under the resources section. This one was erasure code overview. But of course, also the XNS Cloud Twitter account. And we also have a Facebook as well, if that's more your cup of tea. But it's kind of a one-pager style document, so it isn't too long. And I intentionally didn't use super kind of technical language. I tried to keep it... I tried to use the right term for everything, so there is some technical language, I guess, but it isn't like mumbo-jumbo type stuff. I think it should be pretty straightforward to follow. So give that a read, because this is really important to understanding kind of what powers our network and what drives some of our key strengths compared to other networks. So I'm very happy to be able to put out that article, and I encourage you to make sure that you understand that, because if you understand that, then you really understand what drives our network and allows it to be as available as it is, as performant as it is. And if you understand that, then you totally get the whole like why it's important to stay online. Like all sorts of other things kind of come together, I think, in a way that makes a lot of logical sense. So this is kind of the cornerstone, or this is the piece kind of right in the middle of everything that touches everything else and drives everything else. So very happy to be able to publicize that this week, and I appreciate all of you for giving me the time and the opportunity to discuss that. This is more kind of a meta topic, I suppose, or this is a topic in the storage provider meetup that's about the storage provider meetups. Something that we would like to do in future storage provider meetups. I can't give you an exact timeline because this is an idea that we came up with pretty recently, but I think would be awesome to do. I think at some point between now and the end of the year, we're going to start doing a couple kind of themed storage provider meetups, in the sense that we bring a pretty specific topic or a pretty specific kind of aspect of either storage providing or something about the network. And we just kind of do I don't know if I'd say a lecture type thing, but we do more of a kind of informational, and stick pretty closely to what that topic is. So if that sounds abstract, that's because I'm about to dive into what might be the first example. So we have a couple ideas already. One of them would be security, for example. So if you're a storage provider, what kind of security might you need to be aware of, or what kind of steps and practices should you probably be taking? I know a lot of you are using Linux for your like full licensed providers or even basics. Linux has a number of quirks. Well, I don't know if I'd say quirks, but since it goes back a long time and it's used in a variety of different applications, from servers and like IT, like core IT infrastructure, all the way to like children's devices and stuff. Linux has a very rigorous and kind of firm security environment that is not the most intuitive to learn as a beginner. So there's potentially some of you out there that would feel a lot more like be able to sleep better at night knowing that your storage provider is in a pretty secure environment, and that you are taking into account some factors that maybe you didn't think about before. So I can't give you an exact timeline on it won't be next week, but maybe a couple weeks, or in the couple weeks after that, perhaps. But we have security as an idea, and we have a couple others as well that I think might make interesting storage provider topics. And I'm sure we could have some fun with it. Maybe have a segment at the end of the call where you guys get to come up, and if we missed anything, or if anything maybe wasn't explained as well as we could have, then you guys would definitely have some floor time to be able to speak to that. I think it could be kind of cool, almost like a module type thing. So I don't know what you guys think of that, but I think it'd be cool to at least give that a try and see how it goes. But that might be a future storage provider meetup. I'll be able to open up the floor now for questions. Okay, I do see a question from Wally. Are you profiling our hosts by upload speed? So that's a bit of a complicated answer, and any answer that I give today within a couple months is going to be outdated. So I probably won't get too deep into it, but I will say that the relayers themselves do naturally favor faster storage providers. We aren't rigorously profiling them in the sense that we aren't like centrally like cataloging all of you and giving you some kind of score. I mean, that might be a thing one day, but that's just not the case today. But there is some mechanisms built into the relayers themselves that they do favor faster providers. So there is incentive there, but it isn't like a super rigorous or mature kind of testing environment and all that at this point.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. How's it going?
Good. I was wondering about how secure the network is from things like 51% attacks, etc. Or not, etc. Actually, 51% attacks. Because earlier when we were talking about proof of stake, I'm not an advocate for proof of stake, but back then it was like because the hash rate was so low and so centralized that it was a possible security risk. And I was wondering how it looks today and how I can see it for myself.
Sure. So one of the ways to probably look at that is kind of the network hash rate graph. So last summer, meaning summer 2021, I think was kind of a low point hash rate wise, as in obviously mining had been live on our chain for a while. Just to kind of reiterate, I know you know this, but just to kind of put it out there again, the examiners themselves aren't consensus miners, so they aren't actually producing the blocks. The examiners are getting revenue and they're benefiting through the smart contracts that are contained in the blocks. But the actual mining itself is done through proof of work ASIC miners. So I was just kind of making sure we're all on the same page on that. So after several years of mining on our chain, summer 2021, the network hash rate kind of reached a low point. In the sense that there were just a couple big farms that started to wind down. I don't know the full story, and partially that's almost by design because ASIC mining, proof of work mining, does tend to be a little secretive. There's no real easy way to know just by observing network effects. But anyhow, but in the ramp up from kind of fall 2021 into early 22, as the coin price started to go up, all sorts of hash rate then started jumping on our chain. So that was kind of interesting that after a couple of years of staying in the same channel, and then in the kind of summer of that year, it actually went down a bit. Then it started shooting way back up and kind of following the coin price as the coin price went up to like $3 and more. So yeah, the network hash rate then reached a high, I think like an all-time high. I think we were, off the top of my head, I mean, I don't want to say a number just in case it's wrong, but I think something like 10 petahash per second, something kind of like that. So our difficulty was at an all-time high. I mean, it was kind of way up there. And all this mining hash rate seemed to appear out of nowhere. There was more mining hash rate on our chain than there ever had been before. So clearly some people were paying attention. Some people were picking up these miners and setting up farms. But when we kind of first made those wave of announcements that we intended to switch to proof of stake, That was kind of in the wake of summer 2021 when it seemed like the hash rate was kind of low and it was maybe not going to go up anytime soon. But the events as the coin price went up, and it was clear that hash rate did materialize as long as there's a market for it. That did make us feel a little better about our chain in the sense that there was kind of hash rate waiting just for the right price, I guess, to the point where it was profitable for them to run. So that's encouraging. And I think, or at least we are hoping, and we're kind of planning on the basis of being able to get to those levels again, hash rate wise. So that, the fact that the hash rate kind of went from like under 1 petahash to 10 or more, or close to 10 anyway, if it didn't quite get over. But that did make us feel better that there was the hash rate, the kinds of hash rate that we wanted out there. So that stayed our hand a bit when it came to the proof of stake switch. But if hash rate levels reach a point again where potentially they are low enough that a 51% wouldn't be that out of the question or wouldn't be that crazy of a thing that might happen, then we would more strongly look at developing that proof of stake again. So I think from us, you can expect pretty clear communication that when we do start to get to that point and we are looking at proof of stake pretty seriously and wanting to develop that, I think we'll be very open about that. Obviously, the decisions that we make in our development affects everyone else on the chain, whether they're running ASIC farms or even just kind of a home garage type thing. Ultimately, you guys will know pretty early on when that decision's made, so you have as much time as possible to do whatever you need to do. But yeah, it won't creep up. It won't be unexpected when that does drop. You'll have lots of notice. But just at the time, or at this point in time anyway, I think we are reasonably content with the amount of hash rate that is on the chain. At least it's not at levels that we'd consider to be kind of high risk or high danger. But we are definitely keeping an eye on that, as well as some other aspects that might challenge some of the security of our chain. So yeah, things are all right now, but proof of stake is an option for if we need that to be a thing. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, for sure. About the relayer that will be like out of the box, like plug and play. When will that be available?
Sure. So the 1U relayer, the deal with that is essentially like we have the spec made for it. We know exactly what hardware to get. We've like validated it. I think we showed it off at NAB, so it does kind of exist, but it's just kind of a question of, or it's a matter of kind of being at the right time, or launching it at the right time to where there's actual like real world demand for it. So customers that are interested in having it. So one of the things that we've kind of had at this point, the customers that we have today are pretty content using their own hardware, which is like something that we envisioned kind of from day one. So that's not unexpected, but the 1U relayer hardware and the kind of ecosystem that will entail will be more for customers who are interested in, like, they're kind of sold on our network, like they're interested in all of the advantages of it and they understand that, but they also don't necessarily want to take on all the responsibility that comes with like managing your own like relayer and all the configuration that comes with that. So as that as the demand for that kind of product comes, then we make that available. But we also don't want to wind up in a situation where, like, obviously where you make it available, you purchase a bunch of the hardware and we make it a thing, and then they wind up selling kind of slowly. So that's just kind of a no-win situation for anyone. So we've tried to time it in a way that makes the most sense. But yeah, so to kind of answer your question, when might that be a thing? I couldn't really say off the top of my head, and ultimately it isn't my call. That would be Ken's. But I think if someone has kind of an order of decent numbers in mind, then we can make that a thing today. So if somebody wanted like 10 to 50 or even more of these 1U relayers, we could definitely make that a thing. But if it's up to us to kind of work at our own pace and gauge demand, then it might be still a couple months. I don't know. We'll see.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for coming up. Okay, I got a question from Psychotics. He says, watching the GitLab, it seems like there's a lot of work being put toward relayer download speeds. How's that progressing? Well, thank you, Psychotics, for noticing our GitLab's channel. I think that's something that that's probably something that some people look at and then some people never look at. There's probably no in between. But the GitLab's channel, just to kind of explain what you're looking at briefly, if you do navigate over there. So all of our developers work using the Git spec, which is kind of a software development thing. I'm not going to totally explain what Git is, but it's a way to kind of show the progress that's being made on our various software projects and resources. So usually the busier the GitLab channel is, the more work is being done. But obviously it's not direct one-to-one because you can't really measure productivity in terms of lines of code. But anyway, so to answer the question, I guess by looking at the GitLab channel, you can kind of tell some of what's being worked on. And he's right in identifying that right now on our kind of core relayer software, there is a lot of work that's being put into helping improve download speeds. So I don't really think I have anything that I can announce specifically. It seems to be progressing well. I know we talked earlier in the week in an internal meeting that I was on. We talked about it. It sounds like there's a couple ideas that I think could be probably characterized as low-hanging fruit in the sense that, we kind of have a couple ideas identified right off the bat of how to speed up download speeds for the relayers a whole bunch with just a bit of effort. So I think we're doing those now. In the past, we have kind of prioritized upload speeds previously, so those are at a state that are pretty good. Yeah, there's some improvements to parallelism that have been in place. So I think on one of the latest builds of the relayer that is not quite released yet, but I think we've got it working internally. The relayer start time is less than a minute. So that means after you start up your relayer for the first time and it needs to connect to all the different storage providers and kind of map that out, that all takes place in less than a minute now. So looking forward to being able to release that version and as well as this version that's kind of being worked on right now with improved download speeds. So that is a thing and seems to be going well. Thanks for showing up to this week's storage provider call. To kind of recap, we covered the major full license release that came out this past week with bug fixes and some functionality tweaks and improvements. We covered the Supervisor Lite release that's coming out in the next 24 hours, just some kind of very finishing touches being done on that, or like the publishing process is just being finalized, but Supervisor Lite's essentially done and will go out very shortly. So keep an eye on the announcements channel. The rebates are ending October 31st, or at least are being reworked to the point where if you're kind of on the fence or you're thinking about it, you probably would want to get anything that you're thinking about. You'd probably want to get that now, or at least before October 31st. So at least the clock is ticking a little bit, so think about it. We talked about the Xminer rebate program and everything that kind of helps do. So that helps kind of ensure that there is some return of your either software or hardware purchase that isn't dependent on kind of coin price and dependent on some factors that are out of your control. That helps make sure that some of it is returned kind of on a schedule as long as you follow some goals that we outline, and that those goals are ultimately things that are better for the network and are happy or are things that are good for everyone. And then we talked about erasure codes and why those are really important for kind of the powering our network and helping the availability and the performance that we enjoy on our network. So thank you for listening in. Thanks to everybody that asked a question, and thanks for everybody who listened to all of that. I hope you come out the other side a lot wiser and smarter. Thanks for coming, and I'll see you all next week. Peace.